This episode of the Digital Instruction Network is sponsored by REMC Association of Michigan. For more than 50 years, they have been providing digital media services as well as educator professional learning to educators and schools all over the state of Michigan. For more information on their programs, including the 21 Things program, the Classroom Makers program, and Playdates, please visit remc.org. That's REMC.org. All right, well, welcome back. This is 517 EdTech's Digital Instruction Network. I am Andrew Schauber, Instruction Technology Coach at Ingham Intermediate School District, joined, as always, by the legendary Christy Lobdell, Assistive Technology at Eaton Risa, and Allison Rogers, a.k.a. Allison the Great, Instructional Technology up at Clinton County Risa. And we are joined today by Shelby Bepler, who is a kindergarten teacher at the Harvey Center in Mason, Michigan. How we doing, Shelby?
Good. How are you guys?
Hanging in there pretty good.
Glad to hear it. It's Monday. We finished almost.
We are done. And we should say for the record, too, that if Shelby's already taught, she's already taught online kindergartners and she's taught in-person kindergartners all day today. So this could be a very interesting conversation, depending on which stories happened are fresh to tell.
Right, absolutely.
So today we want to talk about kindergarten during the pandemic. Kindergarten is its own sort of subsection of the educational system because kindergarten is often where a lot of the expectations that every other grade builds off of are initially taught. And I often tell the story of my experience at a kindergarten building on the first day of school. I was supporting them from a coaching standpoint. And I mean, the things you take for granted, things like line up, things like hang up your coat, all of these things, kindergarten teachers actually teach that stuff. So in a pandemic, when they were starting remote and they were going through Chromebooks, we want to talk about what that experience was like. We also want to talk about, now that Shelby's in her situation has transitioned back into face-to-face learning, what that has looked like and how some of those expectations have differed and they had to be retaught and what that experience has been like. We also want to talk about sort of the dynamic of how a kindergartner learns at home versus how a kindergartner learns at school, which is always a little bit different, but with kindergarten, it seems like perhaps that difference is heightened. And then we always want to talk too about kind of what fall might look like, how we've learned things so far. We've learned a ton, no doubt about it. And we want to get a chance to kind of talk about how Shelby is going to project herself forward into the fall, or at least some of the things that she's learned that she might take with her. So Shelby, thanks for being here. I'm particularly excited about this one because a lot of the other areas of education, I can sort of put myself in the shoes of the teacher. And in this situation, I'm not sure I can. So I'm as much a spectator and an audience member in this conversation as I will be a participant. So
yeah, kindergarten is a totally different ballgame. Yeah, absolutely.
No doubt about it. So why don't you get us started? Talk a little bit about, how your year has gone so far, kind of the transitions that you've gone through, how it started and how it's going.
So I feel like I've had 5 first days of school this year. Initially, Mason started fully online, and that was the model we followed until about mid-October. And that was when we brought back, or we tried our hybrid model for the first time. We made it, I think in my building, 3 weeks before we were back online due to staff outbreaks. We just did not have enough subs to staff the building any longer and to safely keep kids in the building. So after that outbreak, Mason kind of took a step back. We went back to hybrid until, trying to remember, I think mid-January was when we did our second attempt at hybrid. So we were online all of December and then a little bit of January too. So we are now in our hybrid model. And as I kind of told you guys today, we even just made another change from having our typical 50% come on one day, 50% come the other day. We now have a group, or our highest need or at-risk population, that are now attending 4 days a week. So again, 5, new days of school. Today was one of them. So yeah, lots of transitions and lots of flexibility this year for sure.
You're gonna find, I think, probably next September happens, and it's gonna feel like old hat. Like, oh, another new day of school, huh? Okay, we'll just figure out what's
R-
happening today.
Right, exactly. I mean, I think if anything we've learned from 2020 and 2021 is how to be flexible. Oh no. Is how to be flexible and just how to be patient
Speaking
with
of,
the changes. Right, exactly. Like that happening. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
So
when would that have ever happened under normal times with all those kiddos running around and
exactly. Yeah. Oh yeah. The lights never turn off. I almost forget that they're like motion censored because I'm always moving. I never
uh,
really get to sit down. So
you talk
so
about
yeah.
having multiple first days of school, and I just want to mention when I think of kindergarten, I think of just setting up routines, as Andrew was saying, just those basic stuff that seems so foundational, but you have to explicitly teach those things. So having first 5 days of school, or however many you've had, how many times have you felt like you've had to sort of start from scratch? Not just the first day of school virtually, but first day of school in person, first day of school with some hybrid, some not. I mean, there's got to be a lot of reteaching of just those basic skills.
Absolutely. I mean, when we first started online, believe it or not, that was the most consistent I feel like it has been from a teaching standpoint, because all my kids were getting the same content every single day. And, it was new for the families and for the students, but at least everyone was doing the same thing. So from a management standpoint, it was definitely a little bit easier. But then you add in the whole perspective of, okay, you're doing expectations for online learning, which you've never done before. So although it was more simple in the fact that everyone was on the same page, it was definitely new territory for me. Um, and the really difficult part when you're setting up online expectations is you can only control so much, right? Like I go over the expectations of finding a quiet learning space and having the TV off and your toys put away and your learning materials with you. Um, but ultimately, you're not there to control the environment like you are in the classroom. If they had a toy out, I would remind them to put it away and I could make sure they actually put it away, or I could help them put it away. Or, there's just so much more control when they're in your actual space. So, yes, a lot of that is on the teachers to try and communicate those expectations, but it's also, you have that partnership with the parents that those expectations are the same. And unfortunately, they're not always the same. And that's where it gets a little bit muddy, I guess. So, the beginning of the year was definitely easier in that standpoint of everyone being on the same page. And then when we came back to hybrid, it was their first day of school, but it was October. And they only made it, I think they only made it 4 sessions. Some teams made it 5, so they had really only had 4 or 5 days of school. Um, and a lot of it was teaching expectations. So we didn't really get to cover a ton of content when they were actually here, because I'm teaching them how to organize their stuff in their cubbies and how to put their shoes on and how to put their folders in their mailboxes and make a lunch choice and where's their table. And even just getting them situated, can take, even with half the kids, almost 20 minutes to get them all kind of at the same page. And then there's the challenge of they're only here every other day. So it's like it's not as fresh in their mind when they came back, because it's been, a full day since they've been here. So I feel like I'm constantly, even more so than normal, going over expectations. And the moment you think like, oh, they remember the bathroom signal, you realize like, oh, we're still not ready to phase that one out yet. They still need the reminder of what that looks like, or when they need to ask and when they don't need to ask. So it's a lot of repetition. And I think every kindergarten teacher kind of takes the stance like you just have to assume that they don't know. Um, it sounds crazy, but I've even explained where toilet paper goes and where paper towels go and what happens if you get water all over the bathroom, who's responsible for cleaning that up. And it's if someone walked in, they'd be like, this person is crazy because this is so straightforward. But you realize very quickly the things that seem straightforward are not always straightforward. So
Yeah, my goodness, it's so interesting because, like Andrew said, so much of kindergarten is teaching those explicit directions, and so these students, many of them are having their very first experience with peers in your room, and it's not happened every day, and it's not happened, since the start of the school year. So they're also learning not only how to navigate your room and what the expectations are that you have for your room, but also how to work together. I mean, they're just meeting their classmates for the first time. They've seen them in their little boxes on Zoom or Google Meet, or and they've kind of gotten to hear from their peers a little bit. But right now they're experiencing each other for the first time too. So how have you kind of helped foster the relationships within your classroom that maybe were difficult to form through just virtual learning?
Yeah, when were actually able to come back into the classroom, we did a lot of name game kind of activities. I was really intentional, or at least I felt like I was intentional when they were all online. Like I would have picture cards when I would call on kids so they could start to make connections of like who is who. And I would try and get them engaging a little bit with each other. Like they could say good morning to a friend or ask a question. So I didn't want them to feel like it was completely new when they finally were in person, but it was definitely the most quiet kindergarten has ever been. And, it's half the kids, of course, so it's going to be a little bit more quiet. But, I made this stance. I made the decision. I was just going to put out like manipulatives, some toys for them in the morning to try and facilitate some of those discussions and just let them authentically connect with peers through play. And it was really interesting. I realized because, they can't share a lot of the materials, that those authentic, you know, means of communication were happening. They were keeping to themselves and they were building their house with the magnetiles on their own because they knew they couldn't also touch this friend's magnetiles and build something together. So I had to kind of take a look at, yes, I want to protect them. Yes, I want to keep them safe and I want to make sure that there's not an outbreak in the classroom, but I also want them to communicate with their peers, and it just wasn't happening with some of those restrictions on the sharing. So once I was able and got the approval from my administrator that I could loosen that up a little bit, they started to engage a little bit more. I also found myself like sitting at tables more and asking them questions and trying to start the conversation like, oh, what's something you like to do on the weekend? And then, saying, oh, they also like to do that. You could ask them, where do you play soccer? What sport do you like? And giving them a lot of sentence stems of like how to initiate conversation has happened more this year than it has ever happened. Same with asking questions for me. I've never had so many kids just like hold things up and assume I know what they need. So I've had to tell them, like, you're showing me your juice box. I'm not sure what that means. And then kind of having to push them to say, like, can you please open this for me? So that has been really, really interesting because parents do just read minds, but then they, sometimes there's also, a lack of a better word, not enabling, but the lack of the better word, I guess, for like it's just such a routine. Like I could do surviving. Yes, thank you, thank you,
Well,
thank you.
yeah,
Yes,
it's shorthand, right? It's
yes,
shorthand. Like,
yes,
like
Not every moment is a teachable moment. So
Right.
we're just going to
absolutely,
get through our
Sometimes
day, but as a teacher,
exactly,
we're gonna teach you, because this is gonna make tomorrow
right,
easier and the next
exactly,
day
right.
easier if I teach you now.
Well, and besides
exactly.
that, the shorthand that, like my daughter comes to your classroom with, and the shorthand that someone else comes to their classroom with are not the same. So there's an economic function of like,
Mhm.
we got to get, so it's okay if we have Mrs. Bepler's internal dynamic of how we know the juice box we need help with the juice box.
Right.
But if I don't instill that,
Mhm.
then they're all going to come with their own shorthand that
Mhm.
works in their home, that might not be rude, or it might not be anything. It's just
Right. Right.
to them.
Right.
And so you've got 26, I need help with my juice box signals. And
Mhm.
that's too many. I need
Yes.
help with my juice box signals. We can have one. And
Right.
we're going to use words with that one. So you're going to say, Ms. Bepler, I could use some help with my juice box.
Mhm.
And then,
Absolutely.
yeah. And so, yeah, it's, I'm interested in like what your approach was, like that first like 2 weeks. Like
Mhm.
I've never met these kids, they've never met each other, and a good chunk of them have maybe never done preschool. So like
Mhm.
there's a built-in third unknown in there, which is they may not get what they're coming to me even to do. Like I'm going
Mhm.
to give them a bunch of directions. They may not be expecting that. They may not know what to do with my directions. So like how did you get the ball rolling in September? Like what did that process even look like?
I guess I just made the assumption, their stamina is going to be really short, so I kind of made the plan to have more things if I needed it, but kind of read what they needed. So I really focused on, trying to learn their names, asking them questions about themselves on that first day. I wanted to see kind of what their fine motor piece looks like a little bit, because that would give me a little bit of insight into possibly what other or past experience they had in classrooms, how they hold a pencil, how much, or I guess how motivated they are to complete a task in terms of even like coloring a picture. Um, so those were mostly my main goals. I remember I also they had whiteboards, and I asked them to write their name on their whiteboard for me so I could see who knew how to write their name. So just similar activities that we would do on the first day, but without all of the behavior and without, I mean, a ton of the expectations, right? I didn't have to talk about how to use the bathroom. I didn't have to talk about how to walk in the hallway or how to line up, or so from that standpoint, it was, I don't want to say easier, but I had more time almost to cover content, because we were able to cut out a lot of those expectations of what happens in the lunchroom and how you play on the playground. And I mean, that stuff just wasn't happening. They were at their home. So it kind of opened up more opportunities to communicate and just kind of have conversations, I guess. And just start with the foundations of, who is comfortable talking to me, who is not comfortable even with their camera on, because I had friends that did not want their camera on. They did not want to be seen. I had a few kiddos that did not talk verbally the first few weeks, and it was a lot of nonverbals, like you could wave hello to Mrs. Bepler, you could show me, do you want a hug, a high five, or a fist bump? So giving them the opportunity to participate without actually having to speak was something that needed to happen for the first few weeks. Um, so I guess from that standpoint, it was more of like the social, and then taking notes on like, well, who was able to sit for even 3 minutes, and who had their supplies, and not in like a judgmental standpoint at all, but just to see like maybe how much parent support is there, or just trying to understand a little bit more about the dynamics too. So there was a lot to take in. And I had a look into everyone's home, which was just a very different experience. And not in a bad way, but right, it's just a totally different experience. And just trying to be aware of the challenges that parents are facing, trying to juggle so many different things, and just making little notes of like, oh, which parent should I reach out to and see if they need help with this or this. And it was a lot of that to start with, to be completely honest. We did cover content, right, starting with letters and sounds and rhyming, but it was definitely more of like a game approach and really, really quick sessions. I think initially the most they were on was maybe 10 to 15 minutes, because that's what they could handle, and then slowly starting to build their stamina and build the rigor, I guess.
Well, and if you have a successful 15 minutes, I mean, like you almost just want to cut it and say, let's
Yeah,
let's not run this until it goes bad. Like
absolutely.
let's get a good 15. We met our goal.
Hmm.
We'll see you back in an hour. Grab a bite to eat. Go play and relax.
Yep,
Change out of your
exactly.
pajamas, which you were clearly still in.
Right, right, right. Well, and in reality, like, although they're at home, that's the reality in kindergarten. Like when they come here, it's table toys for the first 20 minutes, and then it's morning meeting and calendar, and you go right to snack. So those things are embedded in their learning, because you're practicing rhyming when you're doing calendar or counting or syllables or all those different things, but But really, when you look at the content the first week of kindergarten, it is very, very condensed. When you cut out lunch and recess and specials and playtime, it really wasn't that different. It just I wasn't spending all the time going over all of the procedures.
How did you navigate in the remote teaching experience? The classroom, right, virtual classroom expectations that you set forth in your virtual classroom versus what maybe was expected or allowed in the home. And the reason I ask that is, I mean, you could ask that for any grade level, but specifically kindergarten, that age group is not necessarily one that could, sit individually, especially early on, and,
Hmm.
you know, engage, especially if this was their first school experience. And so I would imagine you probably had a few additional listeners, especially in those early months.
Yes, yeah, the first few weeks, my colleagues and I joked like we should charge admission because there's so many extra eyes. And sometimes it's little siblings, which is kind of cool, right? Because they're getting exposed to things that I mean, what parent's going to count to 100 with a 2-year-old? It just doesn't happen. But they're listening to things and learning things that maybe they would have been exposed to. But, you know, that is really tricky. And I know I've used this analogy before, but there's always those moments in conferences when, a parent is in your room with their kiddos and maybe there's younger siblings there and they're just going crazy in your classroom, and are you going to address this because it's your kiddo, or are you waiting for me to say something because it's my space? And so it was really a lot of that. It was very uncomfortable at times, if there was a behavior that was definitely spoken for as an expectation and there's a parent present, it was very uncomfortable to know if I should be the one addressing it or if that might offend the parent because they're clearly aware it's happening, right? It's totally different if they're not present. So that was a big challenge. So I believe at the beginning of the year, I sent out some of our expectations just to let parents know like what kind of things I was looking for. And then I just made a mental note, if a kiddo was having a really hard time or like I could see the parent actively struggling with a child, like to reach out to them and ask them, is there anything I can do? Any supports you need? Like, I've noticed this, would you prefer it if I address that kind of thing? And parents were really receptive, so it took me a little bit of time to realize it's okay because if they were at school they wouldn't be here, right? I would have to address it, but it was just a whole new ball game. um, and now that we're kind of in it, I guess I would say a little bit deeper into the year, right? The excitement of logging on, I think, has kind of wore off for a lot of these kids, especially now that they've been at school and they know what school is. They feel like, well, I'm getting gypped on my home days because I don't get to do this or this or this in person. Um, so trying to keep them engaged, but also having the activities be quick and meaningful is kind of the balance that we're looking for now, and still checking in with parents. Even if there's a kiddo who does amazing in the classroom and thrives on the structure and at home they're just really disengaged, or they might be having behavior issues or they're pressing like, I don't want to get on, trying to work with the parents to set up a behavior plan and how to positively reinforce expectations at home. So there's been a lot more communication on that side of things than there has been in the past.
Well, and I know that like from the standpoint of a parent, sometimes you don't get a good sense of how your youngster acts when they're around other youngsters
Hmm.
because they are so infrequently around other youngsters when you're there to see it. So
Right.
like watching your 5-year-old act like a 5-year-old amongst other 5-year-olds might be very scandalous for a parent to see,
Hmm.
but isn't that scandalous to a kindergarten teacher? Or the other
Right.
side of that, maybe the parent is okay with certain types of behaviors that we get into, like Christy was saying before, right? There's a certain survival mechanism where sometimes you just have to choose what battles you're willing to fight, and that
Hmm.
has led to some habits being formed in a home that don't really fit particularly well in a kindergarten classroom. And so now you're also trying to like help sort of parse this youngster's mind and help bring the parent along that, like, it's just, I can imagine, very uncomfortable at times. Yes. Like,
Mhm.
I'm not trying to be critical of you as a parent.
Right.
I am trying to create a certain dynamic in my classroom, and that's requiring me to put some pressure on your youngster. And that's just a fact. Like,
Mhm.
let's not draw too much from that. And one of the things that's probably really useful about a kindergarten classroom is that you're very often not having that conversation with an audience. That hasn't
Right.
been the case this year because,
Right.
when when my 5-year-old's earphones are unplugged, I'm hearing everything. If it's
Mhm.
loud, it's in my living room.
Mhm.
And
Which also has, some benefits too. I feel like, we do have all these extra ears, and for the first time ever, I know, as I'm thinking of my experience as a parent of children who are learning virtually, I've been able to really be exposed to what they're learning each year or this year. And so I'm able to kind of use the same vocabulary that third grade math teachers are using, or I'm able to reinforce some of the, little phrases or things that I know are really benefiting my own children from their teachers. Or before, I would have had no idea that those were the tricks that were working for my kids. So at the same time, we can look at kind of the positives for having parents be more exposed to what they are experiencing within school. Oh
Absolutely.
boy, that one took a far reach.
I know, I had to really get up for that one. Yeah, no, I said that too in the fall. I think parents, one, they're so much more aware of what the content is because they're hearing it, right? Or even if they're not hearing it, they know exactly what worksheet we did in math and they know exactly what phonics skill we're practicing. So although, you send home the newsletters, but and all those things, they're just naturally in it a little bit deeper because they're helping with it more so. And there's been so many amazing things that come with that too. And I feel like, especially this year, conferences weren't a surprise to anyone because there's some things that parents probably know more than I do, especially when we are online, because they're seeing the misconceptions behind the scenes that I'm not always seeing. So it truly is like even more so of a partnership. I remember at conferences just in the beginning of February, I was telling a parent, they're struggling with their vowels. So the word cat, they said cut, and the parents like, oh yeah, I noticed that they do that when they're reading in their stories. Is that normal? So like the conversation was much more rich because it's not just them blindly trusting my data point. They've seen the data point time and time again because they're supporting their student. And so that's really, really powerful. Or a parent saying, like, yeah, they're getting rhyming, but I'm noticing that sometimes they're doing this instead. And I'm like, yep, that happens in the classroom too. And here's what I do to try and help it. So that standpoint, I think it has been phenomenal. And I think that that has truly, truly benefited the kids as well. Although I know parents don't always like want this responsibility of being the teacher, but I do think it has helped give new skills that they wouldn't have otherwise have, right? They never get an inside look at kindergarten every day, and now they do, and they can kind of see the nature of the beast, if you will.
so let's look forward. So you've got an entire year of first days of school and new skill sets. You have, for better or for worse, developed an ability to simultaneously teach remote 6-year-olds and in-person 6-year-olds and move them along
Mhm.
toward meaningful goals. Okay, so you know tell your 2018 self that you were going to pull that move off, right? So now we've got a toolbox that's got more tools in it. We've got a whole set of experiences that we didn't previously have. What do you think fall 2020 looks like? What do you kind of keep? What parts of your practice do you think are permanently changed?
Mhm.
What do you think? What do you think you keep? How does this change your practice moving forward?
I mean, there's a lot of things that have been really beneficial from this year. I mean, there's been a lot of really challenging things too, but for the most part, I feel like the kids are really learning, they're growing. The model is working for most families, although it is less than ideal, right? But I really, if you would have told me that my kids would be at this point right now in August, I wouldn't have believed you. I really wouldn't have, because I couldn't even understand like how to even launch it, right? Like, how am I supposed to teach kindergarten online? And then I see how far we've come, and it has really started to feel almost seamless, which is knock on wood, but it is just wild. So one thing that I think realized more than ever is, it takes time for students to learn the technology piece of things. And again, every student kind of has a one-on-one helper at home, right? So that has definitely made it easier. But I think Seesaw has been immensely helpful with students practicing with fluency skills, especially in math, like addition and subtraction. I think they're so much more proficient with that skill because they're seeing it so many different ways versus just our math curriculum. I mean, they're seeing it with counters, and they're seeing it with missing add-ins, and they're seeing it with different types of pictures, and the additions sentence like switch, so the equal sign is first. And I really feel like I've never had a group as strong in math as this one, which is amazing. Truly, I honestly can say that. It's pretty spectacular. So I definitely like that side of things. And what Christy said, the parents knowing what's going on with the academic piece has been amazing. I don't know how I would exactly duplicate that, because how am I can't invite them in all the time, but it's even opened my mind to like, I could record myself doing zoophonics and send it to them in the fall. So if they feel like they don't know all of our alphabet sounds and the characters, they have the file they could play for their kiddo instead of trying to practice it. Or just, it's opened my mind to how many things I could do, even if I just recorded myself.
Right. And recognizing that particular teacher move isn't really that tough. Like
it's not.
You've got the tools, and so
Right.
now the question isn't how would I record myself? The question is, what could I record, and what value might it add to my system?
Right, absolutely. So I definitely think that's something that I will think heavily about. I think it's also, parents might not agree, but I think like the virtual conferences were really nice. In a typical situation, parents are they're just getting home from work, or they have multiple kids and they don't have to leave their home to attend conferences. It's all online. And as much as we love seeing people in person, I know I miss like actually being with the parents. I think, that's a change that could definitely stick around.
Oh, it's a little bit inefficient bringing everybody to the building in a 6-7 hour, 2 nights for over 7 hours, and having people sit outside checking their phones as people file past them and they're sitting like, it's just not.
I know though, like one of the in-person benefits to parent-teacher conferences is kind of getting like a portfolio of things. Like, look, this is what your student did on the very first day of school. This is the picture they drew of themselves. This is how they wrote their name. Now here we are in October, and look at this. And I know as a parent, I would find that really great to see that growth and to get some artifacts from what was done throughout the year. But now with Seesaw, you can almost just do that digitally and scroll through, everything that they've turned in and see growth. I know as a teacher, you probably have found that incredibly beneficial to go listen to a recording for reading fluency from September versus now in February to see the growth. Is that a tool that you feel like you might continue moving forward to the fall?
Absolutely. I even thought about it today. I don't want the kiddos on the computer when they're here just because they get enough of that at home. But in a normal year, like instead of printing all the pages and then having to keep the pages and sort the pages and look through them, and like I just was thinking, I was like, this would be so much easier because it's so much easier to differentiate too on Seesaw. It's like I have a friend who, cognitively he's about 3, so he needs to be practicing these numbers like through 5, but I want it discrete that he's not doing the same thing as other kids, and it's just not as obtainable. But on Seesaw it is. So I think it's so beneficial for differentiation. And I definitely see myself using it for centers. And I love that all the artifacts are online. I agree. There's some things just about paper pencil, especially in kindergarten, they need the paper pencil. So I still sent some things home with conferences, like prior to the conference, like a packet. Um, but it's amazing. Like, I could like read with a kid one day and say, oh, I never noticed that they made that error. And then I could go back to their story last week and be like, they did it there too. I just didn't notice. And so it helps with the consistency piece, especially because I'm only seeing them twice a week. I can kind of see like what was a one-time thing versus what is a habit. So Seesaw is phenomenal. I've really, really enjoyed using it this year, and I absolutely will continue to use it in the future.
Do you have Chromebook carts under normal circumstances?
Under normal circumstances, yes. Yes, we
Okay.
do. And they do really well with those. We have them all like color coded by the cords and the spot so they can independently put them away, plug them in, that kind of thing. Um, but part of me wonders, are those going to go away, and are they going to have their computers all the time now? There's a lot of things that I think could really change after this
Sure.
year. And it's a lot of them for the better. I think even as a country, we're noticing how to be a little bit more efficient with things when we have to make do. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see. But yes, absolutely, we'll keep the tech
Yeah.
piece heavily involved in the classroom.
There's a lot going on in that sentence that you said almost in passing. We as a system are learning how to best use the tools when we have to make do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a brilliant observation, as long as not as long as it's a brilliant observation, period. It will be beneficial as long as we are able to reflect in a way that says, okay, under duress, we adjusted to make this particular use of this tool.
Mm-hmm.
But look, if we did it this way all the time, it's actually an improvement over what we were doing prior.
Right.
At least situationally, right?
Right.
You wouldn't have to get the kids on Seesaw for every activity like you are
Right.
now.
Right.
But certain activities, like you were saying, like if you could find a way to capture just whatever the connection was between Seesaw and math that pushed your students to an elevated level this year
Mm-hmm.
compared to previous years, well, that's certainly something worth looking at. And there's no doubt about it.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, it seems like this past year has sort of forced us all to maybe use technology that we wouldn't necessarily use, or use it in the way that we're using it.
Mhm.
And then hopefully this coming year will be more of an evaluation of that technology to assess, hey, is this something that I want to use in the same way? Is this enhancing what I'm doing? Or was this just, for emergency purposes? So instead of being forced to use that technology this next year, hopefully that's the case anyway, you can use and build what you've learned, and then pick and choose what makes most sense in whatever
Mhm.
environment you're in.
Right. I was thinking today even, we just launched like our read to self model to really get their hands and their eyes on books and, help them realize you can read. They have this misconception like reading's this unobtainable thing, right? And, even when they read a sentence, they're like, well, I don't know how to read. Like, well, you just did it, like that's exactly what you just did. And I was thinking about my read to self today, and because I only had 14 here, but I didn't get to read with all of them because their stamina is at about like 6 minutes right now. So I just naturally can't get to them all. And I even thought like next year they could get their Chromebooks out and they could record themselves reading. Like they could like read to their Chromebooks and I could see everyone read and kind of take notes and then be a little bit more informed the next time I go. So I'm already starting to think like how could I do that in a way that would be efficient but also really beneficial from a data standpoint.
yeah. That is something. I mean,
Yeah, that's neat.
like I can't keep, like the high school teacher in me, the former high school teacher in me, has no problem saying, well, it might just take us 45 minutes to get through this activity. And so I just block off a 45-minute window and
Mm-hmm.
plan on a couple of redirects and call it a day. Whereas like you don't have that option. Like once it starts going south, the activity is over. So
Yeah, and you have to be able to swing on a dime. I mean, I don't even know what that's a saying. Swing on a dime. I don't
It's
know. I don't
turn
know.
on a dime.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Turn on a dime. I don't
Yeah.
even know what I'm saying anymore. But I had, you have all these different levels of exposure to school, right? And we're in almost March content, right? Like we're thinking, okay, they're reading, they're doing subtraction really well, they're doing this and this, but yet for some kiddos, they've only had X amount of school days. And you still have the students that aren't used to school and aren't used to having to do things they don't necessarily want to do, or have trauma. And, if they think they're in trouble, even if they're not in trouble, their instinct is to run and hide. So today I'm running centers and I'm trying to do a small group. And I already knew, my aide, yes, I would love for her to be doing intervention, but it's only their third time doing centers. I need her to be walking around and helping and supporting where they need it. And I had a friend that just did not want to participate, and his reaction was to flee the classroom. And it happened. I mean, the whole center time, he was on top of a countertop. He was under tables. He was trying to lock himself in the bathroom. He was trying to leave. And so at some point when my aide was struggling to get him back on task, she had to teach my small group and I had to go address the situation. So it's so tricky because yeah, you can have these expectations and you can go over every single detail of, what the expectations are, what to do when they're done, how to communicate their needs, and then it could just be one thing that doesn't go right and you've got to be ready to switch. So it's a lot of that right now, but we're making it work.
I have chosen as an editorial decision to not highlight too much the fact that my daughter is in your classroom. Although if you were observant, you would have seen her wandering around in the back.
Oh, I saw your strategic cover. I know all those strategies. I know all those strategies. I know she was backwards down the stairs. You were I live those strategies. I live those strategies, you guys. I get it.
Okay. In listening to this conversation and participating in it, you get a sense of reality in a way that makes the narrative about school during the pandemic much more nuanced and complex. It's not, yeah, it was okay, or no, it was terrible, or everybody did worse, or everybody did better. It's none of that. It's this very complex mix of some good news and some bad news, some solutions that are, duct tape and twist ties, and some solutions that are so streamlined now that we're not going to keep them. They're not solutions anymore. They're a new way of doing business. It's an odd mix of how has this impacted math versus how has this impacted writing versus how has this impacted parent conferences? Like all of these little pieces are coming into play and everything is taking its turn, having to be transitioned through the pandemic. And what comes out the other side of that is going to take some time to sort out. And one of the things that I really appreciated about the time you gave us is that you are already starting to sort that out. You're recognizing the new things that you're having to put in place. And I'm sure that there are some of those things that you're going to say good riddance to as soon as you get a chance. And there's other things that, like, this isn't so bad. I could do this, and this has some pleasant side effects. And then it is true that the pandemic was what gave me the reason to have to do this, but it's okay that I have to do this, And so I really appreciated that nuanced look, which, I mean, if nuanced kindergarten is all about nuance, there is very little that is straightforward. So I didn't expect anything less than that, but I appreciate very much you coming on and sharing your story with us. So thank you. Okay, Christy, you want to wrap up?
Sure. I want to say thank you as well. Thanks for sharing this with us. I know Andrew has kind of witnessed your journey a little bit from one side of the camera, but sharing it with the rest of us, we really appreciate that. And I think your perspective is incredibly unique and maybe more than maybe some other kindergarten teachers in other districts because you did start fully virtual, you went to hybrid, you're doing a mixture of everything. You've been able to approach each day with the perspective of the day before or the process before. So like your example of getting individual time with a reading sample with your students just didn't quite go how you wanted it to, but you thought, oh my gosh, we could do this a different way. And I feel like that perspective came to you because you have had to rethink everything throughout all of your brand new first days of school because of all of the different models that you have experienced this year. So rather than taking that as like a huge frustration of, oh my gosh, this is not how I wanted this to go, you're looking at it as, all right, I need to change a few things, and here's how I'm going to do that. You're completely solution driven, and that's going to just really benefit you in the future, as well as all of those little 5 and 6 year olds who are coming through your door in about 6 months from now, your brand new group. So thank you. And I feel like I've said this before, but it would be fun to chat with you again next year to see, kind of how things shook out the rest of the year and the practices that possibly you tweak moving forward.
I would love that. That'd be great.
Allison, you want to wrap up?
Sure. I was just thinking that I think that your story is one that maybe isn't told very often with respect to the achievement of your kindergartners. I mean, you said it yourself. If you thought in August that these kids would be where they're at now, that you would have said, you're lying to me. And so I think so often we are only hearing about the struggles, which are very real. And it took a lot of heavy lifting for you to get to this point. But I think it's really an important story to share that, your kids are incredibly versatile, and you've done a great job building that parent-teacher team to ensure that, that transition is seamless, and, and then the ultimate outcome is that student achievement. So awesome job on that. And I really, as Andrew said, appreciate that you're already reflecting on your craft in terms of the lessons you're using, the technology you've embraced, and, using that to prepare for whatever next year will look like.
Shelby, you want to wrap up?
Yes. So first of all, I just want to thank you for inviting me. I was really nervous to start, but this was like so relaxed, and it was so fun just to talk with you guys. So I really appreciate being a part of the process. I guess the last thing, just to put like a little stamp, although the year's not over, my perspective is, we ask kids all the time to do things that they don't know how to do. And we ask them all the time to be flexible when change comes. And we realize as adults, especially in this year, how difficult that is. And I really feel like we could all take a note from them, of how much, growth that they make and how focused and driven they are to reach their goals. And that's the stance I've taken. I preach growth mindset to my kiddos, and it's so important that I have it too. And so when things are hard for them and they're hard for me, I tell them I'm still learning how to do this. And it's been a lot of that this year, but I think I've grown in more ways than I can even reflect on at times. And yes, it's been super, super challenging. But when you look at it, there's been a lot of beneficial things that have come from this year. And if nothing else, they're extremely flexible, and they're super, super techy now. And, they can accomplish anything. And look at the barrier that they were set in front of, and they're overcoming it. So it's been really, really exciting to see.
Shelby Bepler, kindergarten teacher at the Harvey Center in Mason, Michigan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Be sure to check out our full Digital Instruction Network playlist using this link. And as always, use our 517 EdTech website for more information. You can follow us on Twitter using the hashtag 517 EdTech. And if you'd like to join our mailing list for updates and news blasts, click on this link as well.